College Manager and Director, Father Archibald Parayate, our dear Principal, Dr. B.O.M.S, esteemed guests and dear participants, a warm good afternoon to one and all present here. Dr. Shashi Taroor is a name synonymous with erudition and eloquence. A former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, a true heir to Nehruvian legacy, embodying the values of pluralism, secularism, and intellectualism that were central to Jawaharlal Nehru's vision for India, a renowned author and with numerous acclaimed works to his credit, and a member of Parliament known for his articulate and powerful speeches. Dr. Taroor's contribution to literature, diplomacy, and politics are exemplary. With great honor and enthusiasm, we extend a warm welcome to Dr. Shashi Taroor to our national seminar. Your presence enriches our discussions and inspires to delve deep into the evolution of the Indian media scape. Hearty welcome, sir.
I am so happy to welcome Dr. Shashi Taroor. Let us stand up and give him a standing ovation.
My dear Father Harshajan, the founder, director, and manager of Prajyoti Niketan College. Your principal, Dr. B.O.M.S, Dr. Sini Verghese, the program coordinator, Ms. Geeta Johnny, the head of department, the very many students here today, including their coordinators, faculty, visitors, friends. എല്ലാവർക്കും എൻ്റെ വിനീതമായ നമസ്കാരം. I owe you two apologies. The first is for being so late. I know the original intention was to start this function in the morning at 11:30, but as you probably know, a politician's time is not his own, and I was caught up in other people's demands in both Guruvayur and Thrissur. I could only arrive right now. It's actually caused me further headaches because it affects my subsequent commitments in Kollam and Thiruvananthapuram today, but that is life. There's absolutely no way that I'm going to be on time for anything today. But I apologize. I know your time is valuable and I'm sorry that I've kept you waiting. The second thing I have to apologize for is I'm suffering from a bad cold and cough. I thought it would be over by now, but it's been going on for about 3 weeks and it just won't leave me. The result is, unfortunately, that sometimes my voice may not be as clear to you as I would have liked. And I just wanted to apologize if, as a result, everything I say may not come across with the clarity that I value. But I noticed they've recorded it, or are recording it, and therefore, you may be able to watch anything again that you haven't fully understood. My apologies for that also. Now, the topic that has been given to me to address in today's one-day seminar is tracing the evolution of the Indian media landscape. And I gather you've heard from Mr. Surendran and Mr. Faber Francis about all of this. And for me, it's a very important topic because my comments on the Indian media are not purely as a concerned citizen or public representative, but from the perspective of someone who sees himself in many ways as a child of the Indian newspaper. My late father, Chandran Taroor, started in the newspaper business when barely out of college, representing a pair of papers in Indian papers in post-war London. And he spent his working life as a senior advertising executive for some of our country's better-known mastheads. His world fascinated me. My childhood in the 1960s and early 1970s was replete with stories of editorial meetings and battles between the editorial and advertisement departments, for my father injected newspaper ink into my veins at a young age. I grew up literally with newspapers. From about 6 or 7 years of age, I can remember sitting with my father at 6:30 every morning with chai and multiple newspapers. In addition to the news, he always read the advertisements, counting the column inches of advertising in his own and in rival newspapers, usually, since he was very good at his job, with a grunt of satisfaction. My father used to work for the Statesman, then a superb newspaper. I remember going to the press as a young boy and seeing the linotype machine men at work with their little fonts that had been carved out of very hot metal, putting together words whose idiosyncratic spellings often revealed that they had not had an English language education. That's why copy editors were indispensable. Growing up in Bombay and Calcutta, I enjoyed 3 or 4 newspapers in the morning. Then during the day, the papers from the rest of the country would be flown in, and my father brought them home after work, when I would have a second round of newspapers to digest. So I grew up reading a minimum of 7 or 8 newspapers a day. When at the age of 10, I published a short story. It was the first published short story. It was not in a fiction magazine, but in a newspaper, the Bharat Jyoti, the Sunday edition of Bombay's venerable Free Press Journal. That daily ritual of tea and newspapers gave me an early and abiding passion for the Indian press, one which I have sustained during 3 decades abroad, when I would have Indian newspapers sent to me in places like Geneva, Singapore, and New York. Can you imagine? By the time they reached me, the paper was 1 week out of date, but I would sit in Geneva reading an Indian newspaper with great excitement to find out what happened a week ago. That was my daily experience. So that's how I was. Then the Hindu started an overseas airmail edition, very thin paper to save on postage costs. And that was the week's best articles, and that came by airmail. So I got that also while it lasted. Obviously, this is all the pre-internet era, when you can go on any website of any newspaper around the world today. And if I'd had a childhood today, it might have been a very different childhood. And I know that newspapers have come a very long way since the days in which I grew up with them. Technology is the most obvious change. Everything is done on computers. No one knows what compositors are anymore. Journalists do their own proofreading. Presentation and layout have also dramatically improved. With color, with newspapers so attractively designed and presented, with lifestyle supplements and multiple sections. Anyone who remembers those days knows we are looking at a different product being sold in a different environment. When I read 8 or 10 newspapers a day, they were usually 8 to 10 pages long. The newspaper, that's all the newsprint there was available. The paper on which newspapers are printed is called newsprint, and there was a shortage of that, and it required foreign exchange to buy it. So it was very strictly rationed. No newspaper, those days, could be the length that newspapers are today. Now, unlike in the West, where young people, including my own sons, have largely dispensed with the home-delivered physical morning newspaper, and instead catch up on the news whenever they choose, using tablets, laptops, or mobile phones, in India, the printed word on pulped paper, or pulped trees, I beg your pardon, remains still an amazingly healthy industry. Print media is still thriving in India, increasing in readership, whereas most of its counterparts in other countries are at the end of the road or swiveling somewhere in the disruptive abyss of today's digital world. The difference in fortunes at its heart has a lot to do with the fact that Indian media has had for centuries to redefine itself based on the prevailing political realities and culture, and of course the available technology at any particular point in time. This has allowed Indian media to withstand disruptive change, while at the same time leverage and cater to the constantly rising needs of our 1.4 billion strong citizens. For instance, the broadcasting of news through radio and television continued to be a government monopoly till 1995, during which time it was often targeted with criticism for its susceptibility to political censorship and also for its rather limited programming. When Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister, one of the jokes was that the radio should be dubbed All Indira Radio, because all you got was Indira. That was the image in those days. Now, since liberalization in 1991, the media has transformed itself. Economic development, political liberalization, which freed broadcast media from government control, and the internet have all prompted an explosion in the quantity, if not the quality, of media offerings. Add a little bit of water. In the process, Indian journalism changed in style as well as substance. But this has not always been a good thing. Take celebrity deaths, for example, to illustrate the problem. Just a couple of years ago, the shocking death, seemingly by suicide, of a prominent Bollywood film star in 2020 occasioned a plethora of freaking frenzies by an assortment of media outlets. Wasn't it, as all evidence indicated, a suicide? Not if you believe the media, which, fueled by seemingly authoritative leaks from the police and a bewildering array of disloyal friends, rushed to tarnish this actor's girlfriend as a gold digger and a drug pusher, and all but convicted her of alleged murder. From the breathless and hysterical coverage inundating the Indian press and TV screens, you would scarcely realize that there wasn't the slightest shred of proof of any foul play, nor that evidence that any wrongdoing had ever been committed rested entirely on hearsay. Welcome to India's extraordinary media environment, in which the Fourth Estate serves simultaneously as witness, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner. Witness they are supposed to be, the rest is not their job. Media is now driven by the breaking news culture and the search for the villain of the day. The news must be broken, and so it seems must the person be broken. In ancient times, India put its accused through an Agni Pariksha, a trial by fire. Today, we put them through a trial by media. Television news in India, with far too many channels competing 24/7 for the same sets of eyeballs and ratings points or TRPs, has long since given up any pretense of providing a public service, with the breaking news story privileging sensation over substance. Indian TV, in fact, epitomizes the old joke about why television is called a medium, because it is neither rare nor well done. Sadly, if this is principally true of TV, matters are not much better in the print media, which, with its ability to provide context, depth, and analysis that television cannot, could have compensated for the limitations of television. But print media has been affected by the same tendencies. In the past, whenever a journalist got a tip, be it over the phone or from a known source, they worked to try to ascertain whether the tip-off was accurate before running a story on it. However, journalists trying to keep up with the relentless 24/7 breaking news cycle and the rise of social media now feel pressed to publish without the traditional recourse to fact-checking. So, the result is there is no difference anymore between the unverified allegations you see on social media and the same unverified allegations when they arrive in print. Our media, in its rush to air the story, has fallen prey to the inevitable rush to judgment. It has too often become a willing accomplice of the motivated leak and the malicious allegation, but journalists today have neither the time nor the inclination to check or verify. And I've been a victim of that myself, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. As one who's been treated to repeated doses of speculation, gossip, accusation, and worse in the course of several years after the tragic demise of my wife in 2014, I've been made intimately conscious of these limitations of the Indian media. Instead of the restraint and caution that one is entitled to expect from a responsible press where matters of life and death are involved, baseless accusations of murder and suicide have been flung around with abandon. The damage is done in a blaze of lurid headlines, and rectification, if it comes at all, comes too feebly and too late to undo the irreparable damage to innocent people's reputations. The distinctions amongst fact, opinion, and speculation, reportage and rumor, source information and unfounded allegation that are drummed into journalism students' heads the world over has blurred into irrelevance in today's Indian media. After many years of facing this myself in relation to the death of my wife, my patience finally snapped and I sued the most offensive of the news channels for defamation. But whereas that channel had been swiftly taken off the air in the UK because of its irresponsibility, justice in our country moves at a far more stately pace, far removed from the breathless breaking news speed of television. One's character can be assassinated before a judge has even scheduled a date for the next hearing of a case aiming to prevent such character assassination. And the standards and filters for what gets into the news have weakened or disappeared in the chronic quest for sensation. Manipulated and malicious claims are repeated and reported uncritically, without editors asking even the most basic questions about their plausibility. Social media, with its culture of unverified fact and viral opinion, compounds the problem. It offers a ready platform for material that wouldn't have passed editorial scrutiny in the past. One egregious politician in our country has spent years saying the most outrageous things about matters he has absolutely no clue about, and his absurd exaggerations are always reported uncritically by a complicit media. No one asks him even the elementary question, how do you know what you claim to know? I once asked a journalist friend about this, and she replied, abashed, well, he always makes good copy. That's all it takes. Make things up and assert them with confidence, and the press will report you because it's a good copy. It's hardly surprising that trust in the media is eroding. A friend summarized the problem succinctly for me. He said, when I was young, my father wouldn't believe anything unless it was printed in the Times of India. Now he doesn't believe anything if it is printed in the Times of India. That is the world we live in today. Now this should be a matter of serious concern to all right-thinking Indians, because free media are the lifeblood of our democracy. They provide the information that enables a free citizenry to make the choices of who governs them and how, and ensures that those who govern them will remain accountable to those who put them there. It's the media's job to look critically at elected officials' actions or inaction, rather than at marginalia which have no impact on the public welfare. Instead, the media's obsession with the superficial and the sensational trivializes public discourse, abdicates the watchdog responsibility that must be exercised by free media in a democracy, and distracts the public from real questions of accountability with which the governed must confront the governed. Instead, it serves as a weapon of mass distraction. That's the real issue. Couple this with the fact that we are currently ruled by a government which has a tendency to intimidate newspapers and to block TV channels for publishing news that is prejudicial to government interests, as was the case, for example, when NDTV under previous ownership was handed a 24-hour ban by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting for its coverage of the Pathankot attack in January 2017, or two Kerala channels were banned for a day, thank you, because of their reporting on the Delhi riots, thank you very much, of 2020, and to arrest journalists and even charge them with sedition. So all of these things have been happening. We remember Sadiq Kapil, who had gone to report a story, being put into jail under the UAPA with no bail and no charge. He wasn't even brought to trial. More than 2 years. This shows you the scale of the challenge. Oh.
ഭയങ്കര ചൂടാണ് തോന്നുന്നു.
Sorry, I don't take sugar. That was very sugary. Now, coupled by the fact that this is how the government is functioning, we have a real challenge. And the distinction amongst fact, opinion, and speculation that I mentioned has to be drummed into journalism students' heads the world over. There's a cavalier attitude to facts and a reluctance to issue corrections. My own attempts at correcting blatant falsehoods relating to me in print, as I said, were ignored to the point that now I've stopped trying. Independent news outlets, on the other hand, have very little recourse against individuals and entities who have the power to strong arm them and control their narrative. The regional media is even more vulnerable to such intimidation because, for the most part, its resources are more modest than those of national media. So this is ironic because we've reached a stage where good reporting is threatened, but bad journalism continues flagrantly because it makes money for vested interests. Yet, despite all these concerns and criticisms, I remain as strongly wedded to a free press as I was when leaving my smudgy thumbprints on the newsprint in my father's office. I always held fast to the evocative image of the canary in a cage being sent down a mine shaft to see if there is enough oxygen at the bottom of the mine shaft. If it comes back dead or choking and sputtering for air, you know it is not safe for miners to be sent down. The free press is like that canary. If it is choking or suffocated, it is a clear indication that society is no longer safe for the rest of us. Government needs a free and professional media to keep it honest and efficient, to serve as both mirror and scalpel. If instead all we have is a blunt axe, then society is not well served. The free press is both the mortar that binds together the bricks of our country's freedom and the open window embedded in those bricks. As a Democrat, I would never call for censorship or for controls on the free press. What I want is not less journalism, but better journalism. So how do we get there? I'll end this speech with a few very specific suggestions. First, we must engender a culture of fact verification and accuracy that the industry in India currently appears to lack. Journalists should not feel pressed by their employers to break the news, but they should be empowered to hold stories until they're sure the facts and accusations are accurate. The rush to judgment on the basis of partial information must stop. Second, we must insist on better journalistic training at accredited media institutes that emphasize values of accuracy, integrity, and fairness in their students. These standards should extend to media organizations. When false claims or intentionally misleading statements are published or broadcast, TV and print news outlets should issue retractions with equal prominence. Third, we must welcome different perspectives in our newsrooms and not allow them to become echo chambers, forcing an opinion onto their viewers in the guise of the nation wants to know. Newsrooms must be required to maintain a more diverse journalistic environment. Every story plugging a point of view must be required to provide some space for the alternative view or for a refutation. Fourth, journalists must welcome comments and feedback from their viewers and readers to generate both an environment of trust between the consumers and the media and the feeling on the part of the public, who are our citizens after all, that they're not merely recipients, passive recipients of somebody else's point of view. The Hindu, for example, had a reader's editor who served as a kind of ombudsman for the newspaper and acknowledges mistakes of fact or emphasis in the newspaper's coverage. This helps drive a natural cycle of loyalty and engagement between the paper and its readers. Fifth, the government must introduce laws and regulations that limit control of multiple news organizations by a single business or political entity, thereby encouraging a more independent and robust press in the country. A powerful business interest is vulnerable to government pressure, and they will usually override ethical journalistic concerns because the owner's interests are involved. India is one of the few major democracies where no restrictions currently exist when it comes to media ownership. I think we should introduce them. Finally, sixth and last, a single overseer for print and television news companies, as recommended by the Telecoms Regulatory Authority of India, would help limit the power of corporate and political dividends, and it would actually limit the corporate behemoths who control our media and help also promote media standards. I still think the best is yet to come. India's population is becoming more literate by the day. We've crossed 80%. Every year we're going up by another percent or two, and resulting in an ever-growing mass of media consumers that regional publications can cater to, unlike elsewhere in the world. But this must be combined with the ethical prerogative of contributing to the evolution of an informed, educated and politically aware India that is ready to hold its governments accountable, its society safe, and its peoples ready to push boundaries. If India wishes to be taken seriously by the rest of the world as a responsible global player and a model 21st century democracy, we will have to take ourselves seriously and responsibly as well. Our media would be a good place to start. Thank you very much for listening so patiently to my debate.
We'll have a question and answer session.
Sure.
So our volunteers will approach you. If you have any questions, kindly raise your hands.
There's a student in the middle there raising his hand.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Abhishek, and the question I have is not particularly pertaining to the topic I have discussed. It's a personal question. As a human being, contentment is very important. So, according to you, what has been the most satisfying or gratifying moment you have experienced in your life?
Oh, there have been so many. Every human being has something special to look back on. I remember, for example, the birth of my own twin sons, because they were born 8 weeks prematurely and it was not sure they would survive. And yet seeing them in their sort of little baby basket heading from the delivery room to the ICU, the emergency incubators they had to be put in, because they were only 32 weeks old. Still, that moment was one of, it's inexpressible. I think that no one can describe the emotion of seeing your own child until you have one. It just cannot be conveyed in words alone. There's something there which I cannot explain. So that was incredibly satisfying. In terms of my work, for example, for refugees, I had the great satisfaction of helping a large number of people in great distress to solve their problems and move on to better lives. I still remember a Vietnamese family fleeing communism in a tiny boat with a cannibalized tractor engine, and the engine conked out from the high seas. They ran out of food, they ran out of drinking water, and they were literally subsisting on rainwater and hope. But they had 2 small infants with them, a baby and a toddler. So the young parents slit their fingers and made the baby suck their blood in order to get enough nutrition to survive. Can you imagine? And when they arrived, they were so weak they couldn't be lifted out of the boat. The American ship rescued them, brought them into the port. And my team and I in the UN office in Singapore broke every rule of the book to get them out through, with avoiding all the formalities, immediately to hospital, and then to see the same family a few months later, healthy, well-fed, well-rested, heading off to embark on new lives in the US. There's few things that can offer you that kind of satisfaction. When I came into politics, I've also had moments of great satisfaction. People who had desperate conditions, for example, when the COVID lockdown came, a mother wrote to me, she was not even from my constituency. Her child was suffering from a very, very rare disease and she needed a test which could only be done in the Netherlands. And they had planned everything, booked everything, they were going to go, but now with the COVID lockdown, no one could travel. And I was able to use my contacts and my influence with the ministers concerned, the civil aviation minister, the foreign affairs minister, and they were able to get a sample of the child's blood onto an emergency Air Force plane that took it the first they had to go by car from Kerala to Bangalore, an emergency Air Force plane took it to connect with the Lufthansa flight that went to Germany, from where it got to the Netherlands, and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs asked one of the diplomats to go and deliver the sample in the lab within the time limit before the child got too old for the present. So these are extraordinary things where you feel that our system can work, that it does work, that a human being, yes, an ordinary citizen, nobody special, nothing important, happened to appeal to an MP who felt he could do something about it. And it was done, and the problem was dealt with and solved. And that gives me an extraordinary amount of satisfaction too. And I'm proud to say that when you're in public service, you have plenty of opportunities to do things like this. Reach out to people, bypass people. I'm fortunate that people do tend to take my calls, so I can reach the most difficult bureaucrats and ministers and often get things done, which may involve life-saving actions. And that's something which I was able to have. There was just a very recent case when somebody in Kerala, again not in my constituency, had needed some life-saving injections for his child. The injections had come but were stuck in a customs warehouse because duty had not been paid. And I was able to call the finance minister at home at night, and she was able to give an instruction to the customs. The next morning, the medicine was released, and the medicine reached the child. So you've got cases like this week after week. I can't say every day, but many, many days in a week, there are cases like this that one is able to make a difference in. So the opportunities for feeling fulfillment and satisfaction are great. And it doesn't always have to be an individual case. For example, there's one, when I first came into Taroor, there was a bypass road that had been stuck for 40 years. That is, a project had been proclaimed, the marker stones had been laid on the land. The government had not acquired the land, no survey had been done after that, and the road had never been built. And for 40 years, the people saying, get these stones off our land, because how on earth can we manage? We can't sell our land. And people say, oh, the government has put their stones there, so government can take it over anytime we don't want to buy your land. They couldn't even get mortgages or loans for their children's weddings and so on. And so when I got to Trivandrum, this had been going on for 40 years. And the people came to me with tears in their eyes. It's not even a problem I'd heard about when I arrived, saying, can you solve this for us? And I said, absolutely, I will. And the moment I was elected, it became the first issue I took up with the then Highway and Transport Minister. I had to go through 3 ministers in the end, 2 successive chairmen of the National Highway Authority, but I got it done. At every stage of the way, there were obstacles and burdens. You have no idea, there are people in our country who think that going and standing and shouting a few Mudra Vakyams as a samaram is all it takes to get things done. It doesn't work that way. For example, in this project, not only did it take that long to get it had to go into the government budget. Then once the budget had been approved, you had to have the survey done within 1 year. About 8 months into it, I discovered the surveyors had all been assigned to other duties and no survey had been done. So I had to call the Revenue Minister of Kerala and get the surveyors back into the survey office to do the survey. Then when there was literally just a few weeks to go, the survey had not been completed, I summoned them all to my office, gave them hell and said, if this fails because you're not doing your job on time, I will shame you publicly. And so they worked overtime, they worked weekends, they got it done. Right up to the stage when it had to be printed in the government gazette, and I personally called the printer to say this has to be printed by today, otherwise the project will lapse. And every stage one had to get involved. And then of course it was done and we actually ended up with this project being approved. And I knew there were plenty of people ready to take the credit for my efforts, especially since there was an election coming. I'm very sure it was 2014 by the time all this had happened. And I knew that eventually much of the project would be implemented perhaps under another government. So I was able to call the member of finance of the NHI and get the checks released immediately on record time. He turned out to be a fan of my books, so that was all it took, and this was pure fluke. And as a result, Sri Human Chandi, as Chief Minister, was able to hand over the first checks for the land that had to be acquired to build the road. And that happened literally a few days before the elections were declared for 2014 and the Code of Conduct came into place. But under our rules, once a project is started, it can continue during the Code of Conduct. You're only not allowed to start a project. And therefore, since the checks had changed hands, they continued changing hands. And I got the gratitude of the voters of what would otherwise have been a very tough election time. So you see, it's not always just individual cases, it's also big projects and so on. Everything involves challenges, you make an effort, you rise to it, and then you have the satisfaction when it comes out. There are also disappointments, you didn't ask me about that, but there are also setbacks and disappointments also, but that's part of political life. Thank you. Okay, but are there any more questions? There is still all right, fine.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Namita Nelson K from Sahadya College of Advanced Studies, Kodagara. I want to ask you that when media always gives good news and always interpret us in a false statement also. When coming into our personal life, how did politicians face that false news in your life? Can you please?
You're quite right here, lady, because when they say that good news is no news, what they mean is, there's a famous old cliche in the journalism world, which says that dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news. So they want something unusual always to put forward. And of course, that's where this culture of sensationalism and voyeurism and unfounded allegations and so on has grown from that kind of background. So you're right that if indeed we're in a situation where people can find something unusual to report, some rumor, some gossip, something unpleasant, they will do it because they feel the public wants that kind of material. It'll increase their TRPs on television and so on. How do politicians deal with it? One thing I can tell you, politicians have become ultra careful in our country today. They know that the slightest slip, including just to say a joke gone wrong or something, can be used against them. You, for example, find that even Kerala politicians who enjoy a drink will never be photographed with a glass in their hands because they're afraid it will be used against them. If a politician is seen dressed in casual clothes and going out for an evening or a party, or worst of all, seen dancing and so on, that can actually cost them their seat. Their ticket has happened quite recently to a BJP MLA in UP who was filmed at a wedding dancing with joyous abandon and perhaps not behaving entirely respectably. And out she went. See, so the standards expected of politicians are actually higher than the public seems to expect of themselves. And the media, by making any deviation from such standards into a big news story, the media creates its own drama. So you have to be very careful, number one. Number two, don't crack jokes. I learned that the hard way when I cracked a joke about cattle class, and it still haunts me because it was simply when we went on an austerity drive, the government, I was a minister at that time, a BJP leading journalist asked, so Mr. Minister, does this mean you will travel in cattle class? Now, he had lived in America for some time, I had lived in America for some time, so cattle class was not an unfamiliar expression to either of us. It's a very common expression. It does not insult the passengers, it is meant to be an insult to the airline companies for herding people into the planes like cattle. And that's why it's called cattle class. So I replied, yes, in cattle class, out of solidarity with all our holy cows. And you can imagine that I thought that was a very innocent joke between two people who understand perfectly well what was going on. But It was deliberately and maliciously taken out of context, distorted. I was accused of disparaging and demeaning economy class passengers as cattle. A minister, a chief minister from my own party demanded my resignation from parliament, and so all this silly joke. And finally, the Prime Minister himself, Dr. Manmohan Singh, had to intervene and say to the media, for God's sake, it was only a joke, why are you doing this? And that deflated the balloon and the whole story is over. But for 4 or 5 days, I had flown off innocently to Liberia in Africa for an official visit on behalf of the government. And while I was there, everyone came to me saying, do you realize you're in the news all the time? What's happening? So I said, what? I suddenly realized, oh my God, maybe Holy Cows didn't play very well. But no, it wasn't that, it was kind class. And the saddest story is that even today, people who have come across that comment in translation in Malayalam or Hindi or Gujarati still believe that I actually was trying to make a contemptuous or disparaging reference to ordinary people. I'm not such a fool. That wasn't at all the intention. That's not what the phrase means. The lesson I learned is that, as Shakespeare said very wisely 4 centuries ago, the success of a jest, a joke, lies not in the tongue of the teller, but in the ear of the hearer. Nothing wiser could have been thought. That is, it doesn't matter what your intention was when you told the joke. If people hear it or are persuaded to believe they heard something else, that's all they will remember. And that became, for me, a very valuable lesson. I've stopped cracking jokes in public spaces. Yeah. There's a hand right there.
Hi sir, I'm Sri Lakshmi. I'm a lecturer here in the Department of Psychology. So my question is not related to your topic, but nowadays there's an increasing trend in the number of students going abroad for their higher studies and even their career, settling their career. So I have 2 questions. First is that do you think, as a person who has been abroad for your studies as well as for multiple level jobs, so do you think that education and career is better in like other countries comparing to India, or is it better in India? And the second thing, how is it affecting the youth in India? Because everyone is migrating, so yeah, that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, but actually, Sri Lakshmi, Kerala has a particular problem of youth migration because the ambition of most students when they finish either high school or college seems to be to go abroad. It's really going to hurt the state very much because obviously we already have a very unusual demographic balance. India as a whole, the population under 25 is 50.1%. In Kerala, it's only 23%. And there are 2 reasons. One is that fewer children are being born for the last 20 odd years because Kerala's population is declining. But the second problem is those who are born and grow up can leave. I asked a young guy once why he was anxious to leave his Sabeta, to pursue your subject here. And he said, sir, what is there for me in Kerala? Isn't Kerala an old age home? And that really struck me because I'm getting old now, and I must say that the attractions of Kerala as a place to settle down is very, very nice. But I agree that for a young person, the relative lack of job opportunities, of outlets for his talent or his creativity, must have persuaded him he didn't want to stay. So people leave not only for education, Sri Lakshmi, they also go intending to make their careers abroad. And that's something which at one time didn't matter because people were going to countries in the Gulf, where the Gulf countries never gave you citizenship, and after the job was over, you'd come back to Kerala anyway, and we'd have your talent and your savings and all of that in the state. But today, increasingly, they're going to more and more foreign countries. And the result is that the Western countries, Australia, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, are all attracting young Indians, and particularly young Malayalis. And it's very, very unusual for any of them to come back after any period of time. They just settle down there and remain, and that is a loss for us because every country needs a vibrant and productive young population to support and sustain its continued growth and rise. You asked whether educational careers abroad are good. Depends on where you go. I mean, there are good colleges abroad and bad colleges abroad. There are good colleges in India and bad colleges in India. A lot depends on how good a student you are, how well you target your search, what kind of advice you get. You could go to a good university, but study a subject that they're not very good at, or you could go to a not so famous university which is outstanding in the one subject you want to do. So all those things are there, but you know, if you're going, for example, to a country like America, there's such a lot of good material available. Rankings by various people, US News and World Report, various education, the US Education Foundation in India. Talk to them, do your research before you make a decision. And you'll certainly be able to find good options. The US is also far more generous with scholarships than most European countries, and certainly more than the UK. But I do hope that if you go in order to learn, to experience, even maybe to work for a little while and put some money in the bank, but then come back, because there's no place like home.